This is Gospel Music Today. We're at the National Quartet Convention, and we're talking to Dan Keeton from Ashland, Kentucky. And Dan, welcome to Gospel Music Today.
Well, thank you so much. I sure appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
We're very glad to have you on the program. Now, you have a very interesting story to tell that we'll get into right away, because there's an alternative to being a victim of society.
Yes.
And that's what you can tell about. You want to tell us about that?
Yes, I was born in Detroit, Michigan, and where I never knew anything of Southern gospel music. So I went through, my daddy was an alcoholic when I was 4 years old, and he drove a city bus in Detroit, and every evening he would go through his route through Detroit, and he would pick up this young dancer from a bar, and they hit it off. And he thought, he had found the woman of his dreams, and they were going to fly off to California and be together and leave Mom and me at home. And so he took the last of our money out of our checking account and bought them both a plane ticket and flew off to California, Los Angeles. And after a while, I would say the Lord got to him. And money ran out, the excitement was all gone, and didn't know what he was going to do. Well, he called my mama at home, and I'll tell you what kind of mama I got. She told him that was all right. She'd forgive him, come home. But nobody had any money. He spent all the money. She didn't have no money. And he walked in this little church in Los Angeles and just told the pastor what had happened to him. And that preacher gave my daddy the money for a plane ticket to come home. And my mama met him at the airport. Said, we'll be all right. But he was still drinking. He's still an alcoholic. And they just kept looking for something else, something to fill that emptiness he had inside, and found another woman, and he divorced my mother and married who ended up being my stepmother, because I don't know why, but the state of Michigan decided that the best thing for me was to be put with my dad and my stepmother for whatever reason. And I always tell everybody, it's just amazing that the state and the government, they have the answers for today's family, or at least they think they do. So I ended up with my stepmother and my father, and she couldn't have children. Very angry person. And we weren't saved, we didn't go to church, and they didn't know none of that. And she decided the best way to take out her anger was to do it physically on me and my little brother. And there are a lot of things, boy, I'd sure like to just never remember again. One of them was going to school one day with marks on me bad enough that the teacher and the principal took me to the police going to school one day. And again, the state, the government, they decided they would fix my problem by taking me out of the home with my father and stepmother, put me in a home with my step-grandparents, who I didn't know them either. So even though it was a foster home and I was still connected, it was as far away from a home as you can get. So after a while, they took me out, put me back in with my stepmother and father. It just got worse. And my daddy decided one day that was enough. I don't think he had anything to do with it. I think God was making plans. So my daddy and my brother and myself got on a Greyhound bus and went from Detroit, Michigan to Litchfield, Kentucky to live with my grandmother. And after moving in, I started snooping around, see what I could find, 11 years old at that time. And under her front room table was a box of cassette tapes. I looked under there, and I snuck under there and got one out. And the first one I pulled out said, "Wanted Live, the Happy Goodman Family." I was from Detroit. I'm a Yankee. I didn't know nothing about Southern gospel music, where it come from, what it was. I took that cassette, and I put it in that tape player. And who knew? Who knew that pressing play on a cassette player will change your life? But it did. And I heard it, and you can call it whatever you want, anointing or spirit, or Howard, Sam, Rusty, and Vestal came out of that little speaker on my grandma's tape player. That was amazing. Wow, what is this? What have I stumbled on? And the last song, they had Sister Vestal sing "Sweet Hour of Prayer." And she told me I could be one of God's children and be saved. Well, nobody ever told me that. All I ever heard, I was going to end up an alcoholic like my daddy. I was going to end up a child molester. I was going to end up a drug addict or in prison, because there's nothing I can do about it. That's just what happens to people when they do that. But somebody, and not just somebody, I remember his name, Evangelist Layman Napper from DePaul, Indiana, set up a tent across the street from my grandmother's house. I thought the circus had come to town. I was waiting for the elephants and whatever, but it wasn't a circus, it was a revival. And I went over there because I heard some of that same music I heard on my grandma's tapes. And that night, I remember the preacher, he said, Layman Napper, he said, God has got something great for your life, but you got to give him your heart first. So I sat there thinking about things I'd been through, things a little 11-year-old should never have to go through. And I began to cry, and tears come down my face because I know he was talking about me and talking right to me. So I walked across the grass, knelt down at an altar made out of old wooden folding chairs, and gave my life to Jesus Christ. My daddy watched his son get saved and drove to Springfield, Missouri, and come back, and in the passenger seat was my mother. And he married my real mother again 3 days later. I can hardly talk. And I sit here today thinking, here I am, following in the footsteps of those heroes I found in that box of tapes. And I am blessed.
You know, that's such a, the details are different, but that's a story. What happened to you is going on everywhere, and that's a message of hope that I hope a lot of people get to hear.
I hope so, because it's more than just the music you hear. I want one of my CDs with my testimony on it in every grandmother's box of CDs, in every grandmother's box of gospel music, so they can plant that under that table and their granddaughter, their grandson, go get it out and listen to it.
Tell me about the new CD.
It's called Heaven's Headlines.
This is quite a transition.
It is.
We'll just go right.
Well, really it is, because I've wrote a lot of songs, but this one just recently, and was driving down the road, and you listen to the news, and you just say, sometimes you just gotta turn it off. And I'm old enough now, I yell at the television. I don't know if some of y'all do that. I find myself yelling, I'm almost 40 years old, I yell at the television now, and I'm thinking, oh my Lord. So, but they don't tell the good news. I've traveled the country from Canada to Florida, everywhere in between, and I hear the stories of people who used to drink who one day decided, hey, I'm gonna give my life to Christ, and they get saved. People are coming off alcohol. People are throwing the drugs away. People are changing their lives. My daddy gave his life back to Christ, poured out his bottle, got saved, brought his family back together. All of these stories just like this, and a lot of it is through gospel music. So I wrote this song, Heaven's Headlines. And it just talks about, you might turn on the TV and listen to these headlines, but the chorus says, well, now I forget. I wrote the song and I forget. But the chorus just talks about lives being changed. And the headlines to hear are all bad news. But the headlines in heavens, they're wonderful. And I forgot the words, but you can go to KeetonSong.com and hear the song. I'm sitting here overwhelmed now. I can't even think of my own words to my own song. But it's on the new CD, and you can find it at that website, KeetonSong.com, and at least just listen to it.
Now there's the family group, the Keetons. Tell me about that.
It is my wife, who is a wonderful singer and a wonderful wife, and I love her with all my heart. And we have another gentleman singer with us, Rick Gray, from Morristown, Tennessee. He does a great job.
Well, thank you, Dan, and I appreciate the courage that it takes to share that story, and I hope people get to understand. Thank you very much for being with us on Gospel Music Today.
Thank you very much.
Now back to more Gospel Music Today.